Hi, it's me. Welcome to this overview of the Limbus Company Season 7 Battle Pass. As with every new season, there's always a question as to whether or not the new Battle Pass is worth it, and I hope to answer that question for you today. First things first, there's a whole lot of stuff like thread and XP tickets that don't really matter in the long run found on the Battle Pass, and while it is a lot of resources, these are all things that you're able to farm rather easily and reliably in one way or another. So while I am showing them on screen here, these things, while nice to have, are never really things that should factor into whether or not you purchase the Battle Pass. Of these things, the most valuable to a new player will likely be the free pulls in the forms of both tickets and lunacy. There's also the announcers and card decorations in addition to these, which I will not show for spoiler purposes, but will always be personal preference as to whether or not you want them, so I'm not going to assign a necessary value to them. It's up to you if you think that they're worth buying the Battle Pass for. There's also a select few other rewards on the paid pass, which are nice to have but not ultimately the most important part of any Battle Pass. These include a ticket that levels a single ID to level 60, 150 universal uptie shards to be used on any ID or ego you want, a second ID takeoff module which gets you any ID to uptie for immediately in addition to the one that you get for free, and a 10 pull ticket that guarantees a triple aught ID from the Season 7 pool of IDs. These are all great things to have on any account, but much like the other rewards, with the exception of that guaranteed triple aught ID, these are all things that you can accomplish just by playing the game, and you don't really need to factor them into your decision making on whether or not to buy the pass. The single most valuable thing you get from the Battle Pass is actually not on it. As always, for every Battle Pass level you get after level 120, you will instead receive a nominable Ego Shard crate, your main resource for uptying IDs, but more importantly, the resource that allows you to obtain IDs and Ego without having to pull them from the gacha. If you pay for the Battle Pass, you get triple the amount of these with every level, effectively tripling the rate that you can get IDs and Ego. That way, you can save up your other pulls for events like Walpurgisnacht or any future collaborations. It is definitely worth the money, especially if you play Mirror Dungeon a lot in your free time. The other important thing you get are the Ego. Each Battle Pass now has 4 Ego on it, with 2 being free and 2 being paid only. You can get these after the season ends for free by using Ego Shards to obtain them, but seasons tend to last a long time, so you may want to have them now. On the free side, there is I'll Go for Scissors, How About You, Outis, and Great Trichiliocosm, Yi Sang. On the paid side, we have Move and Reg Heathcliff and Great Trichiliocosm, Ryōshū. You can't really figure out if these will be worth it for you unless you know what they do, so let's get into explaining exactly how each one of them works. First up, on the free side, we have I'll Go for Scissors, How About You, a Zayn Ego for Outis. This is a brand new Bleed Ego that gains a lot of benefits from Envy Resonance, and it brings along the new status effect Needle. This is actually a really nice effect for most Bleed teams, reducing by 1 to inflict 1 bleed count whenever the unit takes Envy damage from attacks or effects, and then also reducing by 1 at turn end to inflict 1 bleed potency. Despite being charge first, Envy Resonance has a lot of IDs that can inflict bleed, though not in high amounts, and there's a couple of those IDs who rely on bleed for coin power conditionals that they just cannot achieve in Envy Resonance setups. This doesn't solve that problem, but it does help them with it a bit, and obviously it's great in standardized bleed teams too. I'll Go for Scissors, How About You is a 12 to 24 rolling / Envy Ego with 1 unbreakable coin and 3 attack weight. It inflicts a concoction of Needle, Curse, and Nails to whoever it hits, as well as healing the 2 allies who need it most by 10% of their max HP, though for units who aren't Outis, it can't select allies who don't have Envy base skills. This is a massive cheap heal for any team, but without Envy skills in your team, it only healing Outis is a good way to balance its Saiyan cost effectiveness. Its other major effect changes based on how it clashes, and it should be also noted that this Ego can't heal unless it clashes. On Clash Lose, Outis just gains some shield HP, which is not super important. On Clash Win, however, it will spend additional Envy resources up to your Envy Resonance in order to convert them 1-to-1 into whatever Sin resources you have the least of. It also changes mid-effect if one type is no longer the least owned type. This effect doesn't really matter as much in bleed-focused teams, but Envy Resonance teams really have an issue generating resources that aren't Envy, who would have thought. This Ego single-handedly solves every issue that an Envy Resonance team has, and will have with resource generation. On top of that, any team that can consistently get 3 or 4 Envy Resonance can also make really great use of it. The passive is also really helpful. It deals 4 envy damage on a clash win, which triggers needles if the target has it. Damage is also just really nice, even in this small of an amount. Also, if the user or target has 33% or less HP when that clash occurs, it will then inflict 1 power down next turn. Anything that manipulates the role of the enemy is always really helpful, even if it isn't too easy to trigger the effect itself like it is here. The corrosion is also cheap enough, and frankly powerful enough to be used in standard combat. It's a 4-16 rolling slash envy ego with 3 unbreakable coins and 1 attack weight, that can become up to a 7-19 with 3 attack weight based on your envy resonance and if it wins a clash. It still gains shield if it loses a clash, but losing a clash also inflicts more of each of these status effects of this skill, meaning it has a much better benefit if you end up getting unlucky with it. As opposed to the Awakening, which is mostly valuable for its healing and ego conversion capabilities, you'll be using the Corrosion to deal damage and for much better bleed count infliction. The additional Curse can also be really helpful in a lot of fights. It is not often that we get an ego that has a Corrosion that is also this useful, so this ego gains additional points based on that alone. There are somehow no Outis IDs which perfectly feel this ego, and that's mostly because the only Outis ID that has an envy skill at all is W Corp Outis. This means that despite the fact that this ego is really good, you actually have to have a team that can fuel it. Charge and envy teams get around this simply by including Multicrack Faust alongside her, which is more than enough since you only need 1 Lust for its Awakening, which then solves any problems it will have being fueled for the rest of the fight. You can still use it pretty well in any team that can fuel it. Barber and Ring Outis both get great use out of it thanks to it inflicting a decent amount of bleed count, but remember that Outis can always deal envy damage using the passive from this ego and doesn't necessarily need an envy skill to trigger it. And any Outis can deal a great amount of damage using the Corrosion if you want to use it like that. Next up, we have Mubin Reg, a Teth ego for Heathcliff, as our first paid pass ego. This ego is also a piece of support for envy resonance, while also being both a burn and charge ego, which is almost a unique combination. This ego inflicts a new status called Resident Reg Microchip, an effect that stacks up to 2, makes units take 10% more damage from Wrath and Envy skills, and causes the unit to be inflicted with 1 burn when losing a clash up to 3 times per turn. It then reduces by 1 at every turn end. 10% more damage is always nice, and burn infliction is just more free damage, but this is probably the least important part of the entire ego. Move In Reg is a 4-13 rolling blunt envy ego with 3 coins and 3 attack weight that can become up to a 5-23 based on the main target's burn and if it spent 5 or more charge count. This is an interesting ego since the majority of its damage effects rely on its charge, which it gains based on your highest resonance before spending, up to 7, and you'll always gain 7 charge count at 4 or more envy resonance. It then consumes all charge count on self to deal up to 45% more damage, and on a skill with multiple coins, that damage bonus is actually a lot larger than it looks. However, its coin power conditional is all based on the target's burn, something that you will not be able to maintain with just Heathcliff in an envy or charge focused team. So while at its maximum potential it is incredibly strong for damage, it's really hard to actually get there in every way at once. The final hit also inflicts some bind and grants between 1 and 9 charge count based on how many targets it hit, as well as some random chance, because of course it does. The passive is also incredibly good, inflicting burn potency on hit using skills that either are envy or inflict burn by half the number of coins on the skill rounded up to 3 times per turn. If your Heathcliff has a lot of coins, this is an insane amount of additional burn potency. And all of the Heathcliffs that make good use of this skill also have all of their skills that make use of it, inflicting exactly 6 more burn potency, which is a really good amount of extra potency each turn. It will basically always be inflicted in that first skill though, so make sure that burn is going where you want it to. The Corrosion is a bit costly and deals a decent amount more damage than the Awakening usually. It's a 5-14 rolling blunt envy ego with 3 coins and 3 attack weight, but can become up to a 5-23 based on the main target's burn. If used below 10 charge count, it will take 10% of Heathcliff's HP to give him 10 charge count without staggering or killing him. It will then give you another 3 charge count, as well as additional charge count by your highest resonance, though at 5 or more envy resonance it will always give another 10. It then consumes all the charge count it just generated to deal up to 60% more damage for the full skill. The final hit then additionally deals 20% more damage if the target has Resident Reg Microchip, and gains 2 additional charge count for every kill it secures. It is basically a stronger version of the Awakening, though it will be a bit less consistent since it is a plus coin ego that costs 30 SP to utilize. I think you can definitely make good use of it. This ego is perfectly fueled by Heathcliff's only burn ID in Heisho Pak Yo branch, Heathcliff, an ID that already inflicts a ton of burn to enemies. The passive works on all 3 of his main skills to inflict 6 burn, and used in a burn setup, you should have no issue maintaining the necessary burn for the ego's conditionals. You can even pretty much always get maximum damage or close to it on the corrosion, making it really good for damage. However, if you'd rather use it in charge, you have a couple of good options in Multicrack and W Corp Heathcliffs. In that case, you are more likely using it as a somewhat weaker damage ego that you can almost always hit the Envy Resonance requirement for. If you're using it in a proper Envy Resonance team, you also have the option to use it on Pequod Heathcliff, though I would prefer either of the other 2 charge Heathcliffs instead, since they at least generate charge count outside the ego. Though, notably, all but a single Heathcliff ID has an Envy skill, and you could justify any of them in an Envy Resonance setup with this ego as a supplementary option for dealing more damage. Up next, on the free side of the Battle Pass, we have Yiseng's Great Trichiliocosm, a new VoV ego that combines burn, sinking, and poise. It is almost certainly balanced for burn though, which we can see with its new status effect, Shattered World. Shattered World expires at turn end, allows Yiseng to deal 10% more damage to that target using Wrath and Gloom base attack skills, and makes burn deal 20% more damage. Notably, this 20% damage boost does not apply to unique burn, so no plus 200 damage for Dark Flame. That said, though, increasing the passive damage of burn is really nice, and this status helps to make it more reliable than it already is. Great Trichiliocosm is a 4-16 rolling Pierce Wrath skill with 4 unbreakable coins and 7 attack weight that can become a 4-20 if the target has enough burn and or sinking. It gains poise based on your resonance, and then if it was an absolute resonance, also gives some poise count. Shattered World being inflicted on the second coin means that it will boost the final 2 coins by 10% as well, and this ego can theoretically inflict a lot of burn potency, but only if the target has a substantial amount of sinking, something it does not inflict nearly as well. The final hit also activates burn for more damage, then reduces it, meaning it effectively inflicts 0 burn count total. That being said, having an additional burn activation at 20% increased damage can theoretically be a lot of extra damage per turn, since burn ignores resistances. There isn't a lot else to say about it. It's great for damage and burn teams, and it hitting 7 targets means it will be insanely strong even without many conditionals. The passive allows Yiseng to inflict additional burn potency and sinking potency to enemies who have Shattered World, up to 8 more total potency per turn. Like with move and reg, anything that increases the rate you inflict burn is really strong, and that's also true with sinking. Additionally, when an enemy dies to burn, Yiseng will gain a random damage up effect next turn, up to 3 times per turn. If this is a damage type that your Yiseng uses a lot, this is really nice, but I imagine the randomness will make this part of the passive not matter more often than not. The corrosion costs a whopping 53 SP to use, which means it is actually reliable when used at max SP, since it will drop you below 0 on use. It is a 12-4 rolling Pierce Wrath ego with 4 unbreakable coins and 7 attack weight. It gains the same amount of poise on use, roughly inflicts the same amount of burn and sinking across the entire skill, except the burn doesn't rely on the target sinking this time. There are only 2 noteworthy differences. Firstly, for every coin that hits before the final coin, Yiseng will gain 3 burn and also increase the final power of the last coin by 1. The second difference is that the final coin deals up to 60% more damage based on how much burn and sinking the target has. The corrosion has a much higher damage potential than the Awakening as a result. That being said, it is absurdly expensive to use manually, and I can't come up with a reason to use it outside of burn speedrun specifically. That said, the resources it needs are pretty readily available, at least in a full burn team. This ego is best fueled by Blade Lineage Yiseng of all IDs, who is the only ID he has that fuels 3 of its necessary sin affinities. This ego is a poise ego and thus shouldn't be discounted from a poise team, and its damage also makes for great general use, so Fell Bullet or Blade Lineage, paired with the variety of poise IDs that have both Wrath and Pride, should make for a pretty decent ego for mass critical hits. I think it is best used in Burn, and if you're bringing a Yisang for Burn, you're probably bringing Liu Yisang or Ring Yisang. Yisang has 2 Wrath Ego, so the ID doesn't necessarily need to have a Wrath skill, and it provides the most active benefits to Burn setups. Lastly, you can use this in syncing for the additional infliction from the passive. Yisang has no shortage of good syncing IDs, though I would recommend either Spice Bush or Solemn Lament if that is your plan, since you need an ID who can actually inflict syncing, and the ego itself is not very good at that. Lastly, at the end of the paid battle pass, we have Ryōshū's Great Trichiliocosm, a VoV ego that combines Poise, Burn, and Bleed, though it is really bad at inflicting both of its damaging debuffs. It actually comes along with 2 new status effects, the first of which being Entangled Life. Entangled Life stacks up to 999 and increases by 1 for every point of damage that Ryōshū deals with her skills. For every 33 stacks, it will increase her damage by 1% up to a maximum of 10%. The status itself is whatever, but an effect that increases your damage and increases by the damage you deal is never useless. The other effect is given to her by the passive when her skill either staggers or kills an enemy, and is simply an increase to critical hit damage for the next turn. This passive can activate up to 3 times per turn, and a little bit of extra crit damage on a strong Poise ID can go quite a long way. Great Trichiliocosm is a 6-21 rolling / wrath skill with 3 unbreakable coins and 7 attack weight. It's the type of ego that loses SP over each turn rather than losing it all at once like Yisang's. Its Bleed and Burn infliction are both really bad, but it uses both Bleed and Burn of all of its targets to increase the damage and coin power of the final coin by up to 50% and 5 power respectively. In addition to that, the final coin gains 5 more power if the second coin critically hits, and deals 30% more damage on a critical hit. It then consumes all of her Entangled Life to deal up to 198% more damage on that coin as well. All in all, that final coin rolls a 31 and deals up to 248% more damage before critical hits, making this one of the highest damaging ego in the entire game. Also, if there is only a single target, or if all targeted parts have the same core, that damage modifier from the Entangled Life consumed is doubled, meaning it can provide up to 396% more damage just from that effect, which is downright absurd. This is just an insanely good ego that puts pretty much all before it to shame in terms of damage, but doesn't do much else. And the majority of that extra damage isn't tied to a particular status, since it's based on Entangled Life, so this ego can be great in almost any team setup that can fuel it. The Corrosion is hilarious because it is almost entirely identical to the Awakening, except it deals even more damage. It's a 14-5 rolling / wrath ego with 3 unbreakable coins and 7 attack weight, but becomes a 17-8 if used at 999 Entangled Life. It gives more poise count than the Awakening and more Entangled Life after it's done being used, but instead of giving poise potency, it instead consumes up to 20 poise until you're down to exactly 20 poise potency remaining, healing 1% of her max HP and dealing 1% more damage for every poise consumed. On top of that, if the second coin crits, instead of giving coin power, it will make the final coin deal 50% more damage instead. And lastly, the damage bonus on the final coin that comes from consuming Entangled Life caps at 248% or 496% when used against a single target. It is a little bit cost prohibitive, but if you're playing it in poise, it would definitely be worth manually using in order to deal crazy amounts of damage and heal the user. You can get a pretty easy way to capitalize on the damage and power conditionals of this ego by bringing it to any burn or bleed setup. This means that IDs like Kumo Ryōshū, Liu Ryōshū, and Contempt All Ryōshū are all going to make great use of it in the majority of scenarios, despite the ego itself being bad at inflicting their respective statuses. The ego provides the most tangible bonuses to poise teams, which is convenient because Butler Ryōshū actually perfectly fuels it on her own. The additional damage dealt using Entangled Life, as well as the bonus crit damage from its passive, are both really nice on an ID who uses a lot of AoE skills. Not only are there a series of other poise IDs that perfectly fuel this ego, as well as perfectly fueling her own Thoracalgia in the process, but Butler Ryōshū is also really competent in burn, thanks to her Sin affinities and having multiple ego that inflict the status effect. This is pretty unquestionably the best user of the ego, at least for now. It's also just fantastic on any ID thanks to being insanely powerful on its own. You don't need to think too hard about whether or not to bring it. If you either don't have Contempt Awe or don't need the additional resources that Contempt Awe provides, it is always going to be her best in slot. And that's about all I have to say. All of the new Ego are either genuinely really cool or just insanely powerful, and they provide a really good argument towards the Battle Pass being worth the purchase. The VoV Ego specifically are great in general use scenarios. The only one that underwhelms is Move in Reg, which means that if you decide not to purchase this Battle Pass, you'll only have one Ego to focus on getting once the season is over. That said, if you're still grinding to unlock a lot of IDs, it's still worth it for all the additional Ego shards you'll get from farming once the pass is complete. I have both of the paid Ego in my company if you want the chance to use them on what I believe are the best IDs for each, so feel free to add me if you want to test them out before purchasing the pass to see if they're for you. Be sure to like and subscribe, and let me know what you think about the Ego in the comments, as I always like to hear people's opinions on new releases. Thank you for watching my video, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you again soon.